The government is investigating taking possible equity stakes in computer chip companies that receive funding from the CHIPS Act passed under former President Biden. Joining us right now is Mike Schmidt. He served as the director of the CHIPS program under President Biden. He's a distinguished visitor at Princeton University. And, Mike, there's been a lot of vim and vigor, a lot of talk about what this means, these changes that might take place. What do you think about it?
Well, thanks, Becky. Certainly interesting times for the CHIPS Act and the CHIPS industry. I think the key thing that we have to always keep in mind is thinking about what are we trying to achieve here. So the CHIPS Act passed on a bipartisan basis. It has unlocked an extraordinary amount of investment in the U.S. semiconductor industry. It's done that by providing subsidies, incentives that close the cost gap with countries like Taiwan, Korea, elsewhere in the world that are able to build fabs and produce chips at lower costs. And so that's the idea. That's the contract. You provide incentives to close the cost gap. Providing equity is a different construct. These are companies that generally can raise equity on their own in the private markets. Equity comes with a cost, cost of equity for shareholders. And so, ultimately, CHIPS is a really important national security objective. It is a bipartisan objective. But the question is, what are we trying to achieve, and how are we using the tools of industrial policy to achieve that?
Yeah, I guess the construct has changed, though. When you look at tariffs in the new administration, it's changed the cost advantage factoring into some of these. And the way we've kind of been talking it over this past week is that the CHIPS Act was there as the carrot to try and convince companies to manufacture here in the United States. This might be seen as a little bit more of a stick that, hey, build it here or we're going to charge you a lot more anyway.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think tariffs are a tool in what you might think of as an industrial policy toolkit. You think of grants, you think of tax credits. This Congress administration has actually increased the tax credit for CHIPS investment, so that's another carrot. You think of loans, you think of grants. They're all tools in the toolkit. I think they can all be wielded appropriately. I think overall, though, what you do want to see ideally is a long-term strategy, a kind of stable approach to long-term industrial policy. Remember, a single leading-edge fab costs $25 billion now. It takes 3 to 5 years to build. It'll pay off over the course of 20 years. So you do want a stable, long-term policy environment and incentive structure. But in that context, absolutely, there are many tools that you can use to try to achieve your outcomes.
And here's part of the problem now. It feels like under this equity strategy, and by the way, I do understand the national defense aspects of this. I do understand wanting to make sure that we produce things here in this country so we're not reliant on other countries. They can't hold us up for ransom and say, you're not going to get these things that are critical to your industry. But at this point, if you're talking about an equity stake, if I'm a company that can do it on my own, I don't want your help. So you only get the losers saying, yeah, sure, we'll take some of the money.
I think that's a real concern. I think that, again, the construct of the grant is to say, we want you to be cost competitive with other countries so that you can do this here. Equity doesn't provide that benefit. And so you might end up attracting a set of companies that are more interested in funds for, say, liquidity purposes or cash purposes, as opposed to competitiveness purposes. And I think that's a concern.
Is Intel, a cash-strapped company then to say that they want the money and they'd potentially take it? If you don't say that you don't want the money, does that label you as a loser who's on your way down?
I can't speak to how the negotiations are going between Intel and the government. What I can say with respect to Intel is, number one, I think it's an important focus. It's an important national security priority. CHIPS has a range of investments. You have TSMC building a massive facility in Arizona. You have Samsung in Texas. You have Micron, SK Hynix, and beyond. But Intel obviously is a really important part of the national strategy. I think the question is, again, what are we trying to achieve, and what tools do we have to achieve it? And I would just say on Intel, the issue there is demand, right? They need customers for their fabs.
They need customers, and you can't manufacture that at the government level. I do understand Treasury Secretary Bessent's point, though, that we should be getting something back for this. Is there any way to incentivize these companies and not have the American taxpayer pick up the entire bill? We should get something for what we're putting out.
But hold on, can I just ask a question that relates to this, though? Isn't the whole point that we are getting something back? That as taxpayers, but as taxpayers,
is this an infrastructure bill then, and then do you treat these companies like utilities? If we lay out the
no. What I'm saying is the benefit to the benefit to the taxpayer may not come in the actual equity. The benefit to the taxpayer is that we have the national security and we're producing them in the country.
Everything else that we see that way, we end up treating the companies who participate in it as utilities. Like, you're going to have to give something back for what you get. And are you putting? It's a mess. It's a bit of a question because I can play either side of this.
Yeah, I think. Look, this is debate, so we set up the CHIPS office when I was there as basically a private investment fund in the government. We had industry people, investment folks, private equity folks. And we sat in an investment committee and we had these discussions. And to Andrew's point, the way we always thought about it was the return for the taxpayer was in economic and national security. It was in
but what if you picked the wrong companies? Like it looks like you may have in some cases.
Well, I think what we did was have a diversified portfolio, right? So we said we're not going to put all our eggs in one basket. Just like any investors are who are watching this right now, you say, yeah, we're going to bet on Micron and Samsung and TSMC. And Intel was an important piece of that. And then you structure the awards in a way that money goes out over time, tied to milestones, so you're protecting taxpayer dollars. But also,
would you still be giving them money?
Take some risk.
Based on where they stand today?
I think that the Intel is an important national security priority. I think the whole purpose of programs like the CHIPS Act is for the government to take some risk. I think there are ways to structure things to protect taxpayer dollars. And what I think we need to continue to do, which we tried to do while I was in government, and I hope the current administration is continuing to do, is to focus on the demand side and really try to make sure that we can help Intel to fill the fabs. Ultimately, that's something Intel needs to do on their own, but I do think there's a role for the government to help.
But do you, Mike, I know they're going to kill us. Do you think the government should effectively be pressuring other private enterprises to buy chips that they otherwise would not buy? Because that's where this all goes. When you say great demand.
It's a tough question. And look, all of this is uncomfortable. You're giving grants to private companies. You're giving equity to private companies. And the question is, what is the tool that is going to help to solve the problem? And in the instance of the semiconductor sector and Intel in particular, demand is the question. I would also say, Andrew, in chips, there's a long road between requiring purchase of chips and getting major customers of chips, be it NVIDIA or an Apple, to really work with a company to try to tape out product in their fabs. And that takes major investments. That's hundreds of billions of dollars. And so I think what we hopefully would be seeing over time is a lot of companies working with Intel to kind of give them a chance to succeed. I mean, think about it. Right now, we live in a world where basically all of the world's most important technology is made by a single company that's mostly operating out of Taiwan, and that's an extraordinary company, and there are extraordinary efficiencies that we gain as a result of that.
That's true.
And at the time, I think there's a public policy interest in trying to create a more diverse supply.